So you have to start off this Out of Bounds video by talking about one of the most famous Out of Bounds discoveries ever made in gaming. It's almost like the Steamboat Willie of video game Out of Bounds content. So even though everybody pretty much knows about this one, I have to mention it in this video. We're just going to throw it right in the front of it. On the lower left-hand side of Staunton Island, in fact, I'm going to show you where it is on the map because I seem to be the first person to do that. I had to find this all on my own. If you take the camera all the way into this parking lot area, you can find a sign that says you weren't supposed to be able to get here, you know. This is a nod to the player's inability to be able to scale these walls unless you do something special like use the dodo or stack cars to get up and over there. Now, although this is supposed to be an episode on Grand Theft Auto 3, I also wanted to show you that the gag was used multiple times in multiple different ways. When you revisit Liberty City for Grand Theft Auto Liberty City Stories on PSP, they changed the sign to hello again with a little doodle. And then for whatever reason on the PlayStation 2 version, it says, you just can't get enough of this alley, can you? And then the doodle is redrawn. But of course, there's way more to look at in Grand Theft Auto 3, and that's exactly what we want to do here today. So let's jump out of bounds in an ongoing series where we basically take the camera anywhere we want to try to find secrets and new discoveries to some of our favorite games. Now, there's a whole bunch of really cool trivia about the opening cutscene to this game. One of the easy ones to miss is that apparently Claude's character model is completely different between this cutscene and any other cutscene in the game. It does seem that they used a beta model that for whatever reason they never swapped out. One of the easiest indicators of this is his eyebrows, which seem to be more scowled in the original cutscene version, as opposed to the more softened look for the rest of the game. In fact, all of his features seem to be a bit more softened. But what can we glean out of bounds? That's the big question. And I gotta say real quick, this was a pretty tough shot to get because there is no way to freeze the cutscenes in Grand Theft Auto 3. You basically have to run all the way to where this cutscene would be once you start the game. And thankfully, there's just enough time to see everybody in their starting position and get the cutscene going, even when you have to travel from where you start the gameplay of the game. Now, let's first talk about the room that the guys come out of, because the room is just really tiny and shallow, and it's not even a perfect cuboid. It has a lot of slants to it, possibly meant to give a sense of depth as the characters come out, but it's just really shallow in reality, and again, a bit of an odd shape for what is normally perfectly symmetrical walls. Claude himself does have something that you can't see unless you look out of bounds, the first of which being that his character model starts off clipped into the wall, but there's also a wind-up animation before you even get a chance to see him. His mocap actor seems to hype himself up a little bit, doing a little bit of a bounce before he jumps out the door. Here's something that's really cool. Even though the game flips back and forth between third person and first person, there is an entire animation for Claude as he gets shot. So as he's falling down to the ground and everything, this is what it would look like if it wasn't interrupted with first-person scenes. Also, the briefcase-wielding accomplice has a really funny animation that you can't see otherwise. So when he moves around the corner here, although it's not meant to be seen by the player, you can see them all just sort of slide into position. He also gets a little floaty before you actually see him too, almost like he's on a boat or floating on water. Now, all of this takes place in an area that is inaccessible to the player. It's only meant to be for this cutscene. It's affectionately named the Ghost Town by fans, but what's really cool about this is that it is in the map. It's in the game world. It's just tucked away in a spot that the developers would hope that you wouldn't access. North of the map and behind the observatory, you will find this entire chunk loaded in at all times. Now, it has no collision because, again, it's only meant for cutscenes, but it has some things that just don't get represented in the actual game world map, like, for example, the Liberty City Bank. Also, just in case you never noticed this little detail here, inside these bank trucks, there are boxes, and the boxes actually have the words loot written on them, which I gotta love how on the nose that is. Now, here's the cool reason why that environment exists in the world of Grand Theft Auto 3. It's because back then, they did not have loaded in rooms. One of the things we looked back on in the Grand Theft Auto San Andreas episode was finding out that a lot of the interior shots were just rooms that were shoved way high into the sky and then called out whenever they weren't needed. However, for the original Grand Theft Auto 3, the developers hadn't thought of that yet, or haven't worked towards that yet. And so, as a result, a lot of the environments you see for certain cutscenes and stuff always exist in the world of Grand Theft Auto 3. So anytime you're like starting a mission or whatever, you will find that environment somewhere in the map, oftentimes organically. Like, for example, at the top of Donald Love's Tower, this is one of those ones you just can't access normally as the player, but if you took the camera all the way up to the top, even when the cutscene's not going off, you will find the top of Donald Love's Tower has all the stuff that's in that cutscene. Naturally, I look inside of every every single building in this game, and there's nothing really to find inside of Donald Love's structures here. But one of the little details I thought was really weird and interesting is that there's a little treasure chest that is on one of these paths, and so I wanted to take the camera up to that and show that to you too. And like I said, this applies to every single area of the game. They tried their best to make it seem like this is a living, breathing world that didn't need loading zones. But again, the only exception to that rule really was the opening cutscene. Now, speaking of cutscenes, let's go back to the first cutscene and talk about what happens after the newspaper transition. So here, your main character gets busted out of a police van, and there's a lot of things going on here. The first of which is I can finally show you what's going on with the eyes of the characters in Grand Theft Auto 3. This character right here exemplifies it very well, where if they have a cutscene model, they have eyeballs, but they're very, very weird. They're kind of like oversized pimples more than spheres, and my god, there's a lot of unused eye texture. It looks so bizarre. Anyways, they use this police van for an interior shot, and it actually remains completely still so they can animate properly. But when they need to start moving the vehicle, what they do is they shove the characters into the ground, followed by the van getting shoved into the ground, and then it's stored there while the moving models get into scene. However, that van is moved back into the scene after the moving vehicles have done their part, and the stationary vehicle is put back in place. In fact, before that even happens, you can see the actors being put back in place first.
Come on! Señor, it's no problem to kill you.
There was also an unmarked van that was used in this cutscene that was hidden behind it, and that's also put into the scene. And then you might remember this character gets taken away, and when he does, if you move the camera over to the left, you can see where he goes, and apparently he just kind of slips into the ground. A very common theme for this cutscene. Now, as far as goofy Easter eggs go, the developers really kind of kept everything out in the open. It's just hard to see, it's hard to find, and so one of the ones I wanted to show you really quick in case you missed it is this internet cafe. If you take the camera over here, over to these two computers, you can find screenshots of Grand Theft Auto 1 and Grand Theft Auto 2. And funny enough, these textures are placed over the monitor screen. So if you clipped through it, you can actually see the original computer monitor image that is pasted over with these new images. Also, if you go to the campus, you can find this unique character model, one that's supposed to represent a student of some kind. And if you take him down, you can see that the bottom of his shoes have textures that are kind of unique. It has his shoes logo down there, but obviously that's not why I'm showing you this. The reason why I'm showing you this is because he has a crude drawing on his notebook, one that is very easy to miss, and in my case, I kind of wish I did. I guess these characters have a Superbad complex. Now, sadly, a lot of characters just sort of disappear in and out of existence. It's not like you'll see anything really, really interesting, but I think part of the fun is showing just how simplistic some of these areas are. Like this warehouse that you drop this character off at. It's just a black drop background for the doorway, and then inside is just a completely empty building. In it, you can just see characters insta-spawn in or insta-spawn out. Sort of like how this mission works, where all these vehicles just sort of pop in. You can see the exact moment that they pop in. And it's just around the corner from this building. I'm actually really surprised that they would do it this close to where your actual destination is. But like I said, environments oftentimes are really, really simplistic. I think that's partly due to the fact that the game needs it to be at this state, where things are not as optimized as they would be down the road for the Grand Theft Auto series. But these tunnels to certain areas that I think a lot of people want to know about because they lead to places that you can't go to. So how far do these tunnels go? And in classic video game fashion, the tunnels pretty much end as soon as the bend starts to happen. The bend allows your imagination to run wild. Like, how far does it go beyond that bend? But most game developers know full well that as long as there's a bend, you can basically obstruct the player from having any sort of conceivable angle in which they could see the tunnel ending. But sometimes you can find details that just don't need to be there. Like, for example, in these cutscenes here, you can see this guard that is pretty much hidden out of bounds the entire cutscene. And only if you have the PC version with 16:9 ratio can you even see his sunglasses slightly over to the right. Otherwise, this cutscene, I think in 2 different instances, just has a guy here that in every single conceivable shot that is just completely masked by things like couches and stuff. And another little detail here is Maria sitting on this chair in this cutscene. The dialogue suggests that she finds a massager, not the traditional kind. You can use your imagination there. But when you look at her in the cutscene, even when you're not supposed to see her, what you can actually find is an unused cutscene of her looking over at someone and what looks to be her cheering to somebody, like she was supposed to be holding a drink of some kind.
Meanwhile, Maria and I will catch up on old times.
Oh, Asuka, you've got a massager.
That's not a massager.
And then also, sometimes you get the note cutscene. This seems to be really popular in Grand Theft Auto 3, where the developers don't even bother having you talk to these characters in person, and instead just throw you a note to look at. But the note is the same in every single cutscene, and there is dialogue written on these notes. Now, deciphering them is really, really hard because it's really, really low resolution. However, you can see that it starts off with an introduction, and then each paragraph is identical to the other ones. So you only need to really decipher one paragraph, and then you have the whole note deciphered. Now, before anybody tries to make the claim that there is just complete gibberish written on this thing, there are certain words like here, here, and here that can absolutely beyond a shadow of a doubt be deciphered. The rest of them, however, it's a bit more tricky. I'd be very curious for people in the comments section to try to decipher this one. Now, one of my favorite things is hidden texture sheets. In Grand Theft Auto 3, there isn't a ton of this, to be honest with you, but if you go over to the cabs and go inside of the seat of them, you can see the texture sheet underneath the seat. Now, I never know if this is interesting to other people out on the internet, but for me, I always find it really fun to find textures that are really, really hard to see or just not able to be seen at all, even if they aren't particularly interesting textures. Like inside of this lighthouse here, if you take the camera inside, the lights for the lighthouse has a texture all of its own. And also for this ship, you can see this doorway here. Now, Claude can walk into it, but he actually just walks into the black texture that covers up whatever's on the other side. On the other side of that black texture, though, is a unique texture for a door that would go to the boat. But staying on the topic of boats, one of the boats here is inaccessible, but if you take the camera over here, you can find a ramp that's textured improperly. It actually has the textures for some of the freight instead of the boat itself, which I think right here is supposed to be some sort of ramp texture. Inside the boat, though, is also a bunch of smaller boats that are just completely encased inside. This is an area, by the way, that's completely inaccessible to the player. There's also staircases and all sorts of stuff that seem to indicate that at one point, the developers did have some sort of intention of letting the player get in here. Now, I also want to talk about how the character models work in this game because they are a bit unique, especially for the PlayStation 2 era. If you take the camera inside of Claude here, it gives you a much better insight into how all this operates. See, his torso seems to have a whole bunch of weird geometry that you don't normally see in characters. This is because he's sort of built like an action figure, one with a posable torso. If anybody's ever owned one of those toys, you'd know that you can sort of bend their stomach because the bottom portion is connected to the top portion by the midsection. I had AMetalPenguin help me out by taking the character into a model viewer, and here you can see the weird conjoined parts that are on the inside of the body. The same thing sort of happens with the legs too. There's sort of like a diaper torso thing going on, and then they jam the legs in. This allows the legs to work independently of the pelvis, though not the prettiest way to do this. It does make it a heck of a lot easier on the animators. And then I wanted to take the camera inside of this garage here, where you can get the cars repaired and repainted. I just wanted to show you what that looks like. And unsurprisingly, it just sort of warps in an all-new model. But the cool thing, though, is that it's not the same vehicle at all, because you can see that the position of the car completely changes between the two different models. And this is a good time to also show you just something that's a little funny. It's a personal boundary break, if you will, I guess. But during this cutscene, I was getting chased down by cops, and you had to put this vehicle into this garage in order to finish the mission. And during that, one of the cops came into the garage with me. So once I finished the mission and had pretty much everything reset, although the vehicle that I placed my car in disappeared, the cop stayed inside of the garage. In fact, I wouldn't have known this unless the engine was still revving after the mission was over. And since this all sort of thematically fits in place, I'll also show you what it looks like when your car gets crushed. And to nobody's surprise here, I'm sure, the car just sort of disappears. Speaking of disappearing cars, if you take the camera into first person, and you pan the camera out, you can see what that looks like. The shadow of the car remains, but also, weirdly enough, the rear lights also remain. And it also gives you a clear indication of what these guys look like. They're just a couple of cubes. I wanted to show you inside of more cutscene interiors. This one's 8Ball's auto yard, and if you take the camera inside this door here, you can see he has a bunch of hanging tools on his wall, but literally nothing else. This is one of the most simplistic interiors in the entire game. There isn't even a floor here. You have the stoop that the character stands on during the cutscenes, but outside of that, pretty much nothing else. And some of these textures for these buildings are really interesting. And then for this diner, you can see a lot of this is covered up, but if you take the camera inside, you can get a much clearer view of all the textures that are used here, which seems to be a low resolution image of what appears to be a bar. You can see stacked cups over on the left and wine bottles in the mid portion of the image too. Funny enough, right here, it seems to be one large image, but it looks like they put them on the wrong sides of each other. And then I want to take the camera inside of the witness protection room. There's not a lot in here. There's just a hanging light and a door texture, as well as some wooden planks for the floor. But it is fully modeled on all sides, which is really neat. And all throughout Liberty City, underneath the map, you can occasionally find little triangles. Now, I really want to know what was up with these triangles, so I reached out to one of the game's original developers to get that answer. Now, here's the thing. It's going to be a mostly unsatisfying answer, but when you can't even get a good, clear answer from a direct developer of said game, I think it's at that point that it's okay to speculate instead of demand an actual answer. Anyways, when I asked Obey Vermage what he thought these triangles were for, he said, "They don't ring a bell. I don't think they are mine," and in brackets he says, "like the litter or the shadows. They're probably just triangles that belong to the map that the artist missed. It's also possible that they're simply a bug. The polygons from the building models would have had their coordinates stored in an INT16, and this may have caused an overflow happening from polys too far from the center." Just a long way of saying, I don't know. But really good educated guesses from the best source you could possibly ask for, guys. Here's a fun little example of asset reuse. If you take the camera inside of the ground here, you can see wooden boxes underneath the trees. Now, this is because these trees are used in different parts of the game where you do get to see the boxes, but the environmental artist decided, I don't want boxes for this particular area, and so instead they stuck it further underneath the ground to give it its own unique look. Here's a funny little example of low poly models in this game. If you look at this car right here, it's supposed to be a convertible, but its low poly version shares a similar asset to another car, thus giving it a yellow roof that makes it clear as day, hey, this is not the same car. That's enough from me. If you want to watch more episodes, of course I have a Rockstar playlist of similar content in the video description. Take care, guys, and thank you so much.